The bulldozer blade hit my fence at 7:12 a.m. and folded steel like cardboard. 50 feet beyond it, on the 40 acres I had bought behind Willow Creek Estates, HOA President Brenda Whitmore stood in white pants and sunglasses, waving the crew forward like she owned the dirt under my boots. Fresh diesel smoke rolled over the pasture. Survey flags snapped in the wind. Behind her, 2 security carts blocked the private access road that controlled every future lot, every utility trench, and the only legal entrance to the land behind the HOA. Then the foreman dropped a wooden sign into the ground that read, Future Willow Creek Expansion. That was their first mistake. Their second was doing it while the county inspector watched from his truck. I stepped out slowly. Gravel crunched under my boots. The morning air tasted like dust and exhaust. Brenda saw me and smiled harder, like the fence collapsing behind her was just a minor landscaping update. Mr. Walker, she called, lifting one manicured hand. You really should have accepted our offer. The blade growled again. Another post tore loose. The sound moved through my chest like a warning shot. I looked past the machine to the narrow gravel road curving through the tree line. My road. My gate. My recorded access corridor. The same strip of land every developer map had quietly colored as if it already belonged to them. A sheriff's cruiser idled near the entrance, lights off. Not there to stop them. There to make me look like the problem if I reacted wrong. That detail mattered. Brenda had planned an audience. 3 neighbors stood near the HOA monument with coffee cups in their hands. One filmed me with a phone. Another whispered something and pointed at my truck. The whole scene had been staged to make a landowner look like a trespasser on his own property. I kept my hands visible. I kept my voice flat. You're on my land. Brenda tilted her head. Her perfume reached me before her answer did. Sharp and floral, fighting with the diesel. This parcel is part of our long-term community improvement plan. The foreman looked away when she said that. Just for half a second. Small thing. But small things tell the truth. First, I'm Ethan Walker, 43 years old, former construction engineer. I spent half my adult life reading site plans, utility maps, drainage easements, and access agreements that people like Brenda pretended were just paperwork until they needed them. I bought those 40 acres for peace. Oak trees, creek beds, red clay, morning fog sitting low over grass. But Willow Creek Estates looked at the same land and saw driveways, cul-de-sacs, and million-dollar homes they could sell before the trees were even cleared. Brenda stepped closer. Her heels sank into the soft dirt. The developer has authorization, she said. You're delaying progress for an entire community. Then she handed me an envelope. Thick paper. HOA letterhead. My name misspelled. Inside was a demand to remove all obstructions from the expansion corridor within 48 hours. My fence. My gate. My survey markers. My land. The bulldozer engine lowered to an idle. For a moment, nobody moved. Even the birds had gone quiet. I looked at the county inspector. He looked at the sign. Then he looked away. That was when I understood this was bigger than one angry HOA president. Brenda wasn't just crossing a property line. She was testing how much of the system would bend with her. Then the first patrol car rolled forward. Ethan Walker was the name on the deed, but that land carried more history than my signature ever could. After the patrol car rolled forward, I stayed where I was and watched the dust drift across the pasture. The morning sun sat low behind the oak trees. Long shadows stretched over the grass. The bulldozer engine rumbled in the background. Nobody seemed eager to leave. That told me enough. Most people buy land because they want a house. Some buy it because they want an investment. I bought those 40 acres because I was tired of noise, tired of meetings, tired of airports, tired of spending my life staring at construction schedules and concrete. For 20 years, I worked as a civil engineer on commercial projects across Texas. Roads, utility corridors, industrial parks, distribution centers. The work paid well. It also taught me something important. Land always matters more than people think, especially the pieces everyone ignores. 3 years earlier, I sold my share of an engineering firm outside Austin. The deal gave me options. Most of my colleagues bought vacation homes. Some bought boats. One bought a sports car he barely drove. I bought dirt, red clay, trees, creek beds, a place where the loudest sound at sunrise was usually wind moving through cedar branches. The first time I walked those 40 acres, the ground was still wet from a spring storm. My boots sank into the mud. The smell of damp earth filled the air. I remember stopping near a ridge overlooking the valley behind Willow Creek Estates. Everything felt open, quiet, real. A hawk circled overhead. A creek shimmered through the trees below. It felt like the kind of place my father would have loved. That mattered more than I expected. My father spent his entire life working with his hands. He built fences, fixed tractors, repaired things most people would throw away. When I was 12, he taught me how to read a property line before he taught me how to drive. He used to say that ownership was not about possession. It was about responsibility. Looking across those acres, I could still hear his voice. That was one reason I never planned to sell. Another reason sat less than half a mile away. Willow Creek Estates. Even before I bought the property, people mentioned the HOA. They always lowered their voices when they did. That detail stayed with me. During my first month there, I noticed something else. Delivery trucks occasionally entered the subdivision and left through the same entrance. Contractors did the same. Survey crews too. It seemed ordinary at first. Then I realized nobody ever approached the undeveloped land behind the neighborhood from any other direction. Not once. Every route pointed back toward the same narrow corridor. The same gravel road. My gravel road. Small observation. Important observation. A few weeks after moving in, a local rancher named Walter Briggs stopped by while I was repairing a gate hinge. Walter had lived in the county for nearly 70 years. He chewed slowly, spoke slowly, and noticed everything. He stared toward Willow Creek for a long moment before speaking. "They have been looking back here for years," he said. Then he climbed into his truck and drove away. At the time, I thought he was talking about expansion. Standing there now, watching Brenda's people tear through my fence, I realized he might have meant something much bigger. Then I noticed the county inspector making a phone call. The county inspector kept talking on his phone for nearly 2 minutes. He never once looked in my direction. That bothered me more than the bulldozer. People avoid eye contact when they already know how a situation is supposed to end. Brenda seemed completely relaxed. The machine idled behind her. Security guards stood near their carts. Nobody looked worried. That confidence came from somewhere. It certainly was not coming from a few HOA volunteers. I had met Brenda Whitmore 6 months earlier. The encounter lasted less than 10 minutes. It told me everything I needed to know. She arrived at my gate in a white BMW Sport utility vehicle that looked freshly detailed despite a week of rain. The smell of expensive perfume drifted through the open window before she even introduced herself. Her smile never reached her eyes. She handed me a welcome packet thick enough to stop a door. Community guidelines, architectural standards, landscaping recommendations, event schedules. She spoke as if membership was already decided. When I explained that my property sat outside HOA jurisdiction, her smile tightened for half a second. Tiny reaction. Easy to miss. Then she asked a question that stayed with me. "Do you plan to develop the land?" Not build a home. Not improve the property. Develop. Very specific word. At the time, I answered honestly. I told her I planned to leave most of it untouched. She nodded politely. Then she spent the next 5 minutes studying the road behind me. Not the trees. Not the creek. Not the pasture. The road. That was the first clue. The second came a month later. I stopped at a diner outside town before sunrise. Coffee. Eggs. Quiet morning. A real estate magazine sat near the register. Willow Creek Estates covered the front page. The article praised record property values and future growth. Opportunities. Brenda appeared in 3 photographs. In every picture she stood beside developers, investors, or county officials. Never residents. Never families. Always people holding maps. I started noticing the pattern everywhere after that. Survey crews appeared near subdivision boundaries. Engineering trucks visited vacant parcels. Utility contractors met with HOA board members. Expansion was always the topic. Nobody talked about it openly, but it lingered beneath every conversation like humidity before a storm. Then there was Randall Pierce, the developer. Tall, perfect haircut, expensive boots that had never touched actual mud. I met him near the feed store one afternoon. He introduced himself before I could ask why he already knew my name. His handshake felt practiced. His truck looked brand new. He complimented the property almost immediately. Then he asked whether I would consider selling. I named a number high enough to end the conversation. He laughed, not because it was unreasonable, because he expected me to negotiate. When I refused, the smile disappeared. That moment lasted maybe 2 seconds. Long enough. After that, Small problems started appearing. Delivery drivers reported confusion about road access. Contractors accidentally entered my property. Survey stakes appeared near boundaries where they did not belong, then disappeared again. Each incident seemed harmless by itself. Together, they formed a picture. Someone was testing limits. Someone wanted me frustrated enough to leave. Standing beside the broken fence now, I watched Brenda speaking with Randall near the bulldozer. The county inspector finished his call. Randall checked his watch. Brenda nodded once. Whatever conversation had just happened, they all seemed satisfied by the outcome. Then a black luxury pickup rolled into the field and parked beside them. The black pickup rolled across the pasture and stopped beside Randall's truck. Dust hung in the air behind it. The driver stepped out wearing a pressed button-down shirt and polished boots that looked completely out of place in a field. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm. Brenda walked over immediately. So did the county inspector. The three of them formed a small circle near the bulldozer while workers pretended not to watch. That caught my attention. Important conversations always attract silent audiences. The engine noise faded as the operator shut the machine down. Suddenly, the field felt unnaturally quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. I started walking toward them. One of the security guards moved first. He stepped into my path and raised a hand. Not aggressively, just confidently, like he had already been told what to do. "Private work zone," he said. "You will need authorization." I looked past him at my broken fence, then at the sign planted in my soil, then at the people standing on my property discussing plans that did not involve me. The guard shifted his weight. He knew how ridiculous the situation sounded. "This is my land," I said. His jaw tightened. "I am just following instructions." There it was. Instructions. Everyone seemed to be following them. Nobody seemed willing to explain them. Behind the guard, Brenda opened her portfolio and showed several documents to the man from the pickup. He nodded. Randall pointed toward the tree line, then toward my access road, then toward the ridge overlooking the valley. They were not looking at the pasture. They were studying movement, entry points, connections, routes, the pieces between properties. That detail mattered. A few minutes later, the meeting broke apart. The man climbed back into the pickup and drove away. The county inspector followed. Randall left next. Brenda was the only one who stayed behind. She approached me with the same smile she always used when delivering bad news. The smell of freshly cut grass drifted across the field as workers packed equipment into trailers. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Brenda handed me another envelope. "You should review this carefully," she said. The paper felt heavy. Inside was a notice claiming that future infrastructure improvements could affect surrounding properties. The language sounded polished. Expensive. Several pages referenced projected community growth, utility expansion, traffic improvements, public benefit. My name appeared only twice, both times near paragraphs describing cooperation from neighboring landowners. Cooperation. Interesting choice of word. I looked up. Brenda was watching me. "This development is moving forward," she said. "You can either be part of it or stand in the way." Then she walked back toward her vehicle. The BMW door closed with a soft click. Seconds later, she was gone. Dust settled across the road behind her. The field finally emptied. Only the damaged fence remained. I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything. Photographs, measurements, property markers, tire tracks. The sun climbed high overhead. Heat shimmered above the grass. Sweat dampened the back of my shirt. Every new picture raised more questions than answers. Then I reached the northern corner of the property. One of the survey stakes was gone. Not knocked over. Not buried. Gone. In its place sat a bright orange marker I had never seen before. No label. No identification number. Nothing. Just a single marker standing in the dirt where it did not belong. I crouched beside it. Fresh boot prints surrounded the area. The soil was still loose. Someone had been there recently. Very recently. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Walter Briggs. "We need to talk before they move again. We need to talk before they move again." I read Walter's message twice. The sun was dropping behind the ridge by then. Long shadows stretched across the pasture. The orange marker still stood in the dirt beside me. The loose soil around it had not settled yet. Someone had placed it there recently. Someone wanted it noticed. I drove to Walter's ranch just before sunset. His property sat 3 miles west of mine behind a line of old live oaks. The gravel road rattled beneath my tires. Dust drifted through the orange light. Walter was already waiting on his porch when I arrived. A metal fan hummed beside him. A glass of iced tea sweated on the table. He looked toward my truck before I even stepped out. "They finally started pushing," he said. I nodded. That answer seemed to confirm something for him. He motioned me toward a chair. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Crickets had already started chirping in the grass. Somewhere beyond the trees, a tractor engine echoed across the valley. Walter reached into a weathered cabinet and pulled out a folded map. The paper looked old. Very old. He spread it across the table. The corners curled upward immediately. My eyes moved across survey lines, property boundaries, and faded notes written decades earlier. Then I noticed something. My road. The same narrow access road everyone kept staring at. Walter tapped the map with one finger. That road has always mattered more than the land around it. He did not explain further. He did not need to. The way he said it carried weight. Years of weight. I leaned closer. Several parcels behind Willow Creek appeared on the map. Hundreds of acres. Far more than I realized. Some belonged to ranchers. Some belonged to trusts. Others appeared undeveloped. The access route connected all of them. Every single one. A cold breeze moved through the porch screen. Walter sat back in his chair. Developers have been trying to figure out a way around that road for years. There it was again. The road. Always the road. I asked why nobody had mentioned this before. Walter gave a dry laugh. Because most people think the value is in the houses. The fan continued humming. The porch light flickered on overhead. Tiny insects immediately gathered around it. Then Walter opened a second folder. This one looked newer. Inside were photographs. Survey crews. County meetings. Development proposals. Public notices. Names I recognized. Randall Pierce appeared in several photographs. So did Brenda. One image showed them standing beside county officials nearly 2 years earlier. That stopped me. According to Brenda, the current expansion plans were recent. These photographs suggested otherwise. Much otherwise. I flipped through more pages. The dates stretched back farther than I expected. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every proposal seemed connected to the same area. The same corridor. The same future growth zone. My property sat directly in the middle of it. Walter watched my expression carefully. Now you understand why they wanted a quick sale. The night air felt cooler suddenly. I looked back down at the documents. The offer Randall made months earlier no longer seemed random. Neither did the pressure campaign. Neither did the bulldozer. Then my phone vibrated on the table. An email notification appeared on the screen. Sender, Randall Pierce Development Group. Subject line, Final Purchase Offer. Final Purchase Offer. The words sat on my screen like a warning sign. Walter leaned forward and adjusted his glasses. The porch light reflected off the phone. Crickets filled the silence around us. I opened the email. The offer was nearly double what Randall had proposed before. The number would have made most landowners stop and think. It did not make me think. It made me suspicious. People do not suddenly offer that kind of money unless something is worth much more. I scrolled farther. A deadline appeared near the bottom. 48 hours. Quick decisions always benefit the person asking for them. Walter noticed the deadline too. He let out a slow breath. They are running out of patience. The fan continued humming beside us. Warm air drifted across the porch. I looked back at the photographs spread across the table. The same faces kept appearing. Randall, Brenda, county officials, consultants, surveyors. The years changed. The pattern never did. By the time I drove home, the sky was completely dark. My headlights swept across the pasture as I turned onto the access road. Something immediately felt different. The gate stood open. I never left it open. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. The engine noise echoed through the trees. I slowed down and rolled forward carefully. Fresh tire tracks crossed the gravel. Not one vehicle. Several. I parked near the gate and stepped out. The night smelled like dust and cedar. A distant generator hummed somewhere beyond the subdivision. My flashlight beam moved across the fence line. Then it landed on another orange marker. This one had not been there that morning. Neither had the second one 20 yards farther down. Someone was laying out a path. I followed the markers deeper into the property. Each one appeared freshly placed. The soil around them was loose. The pattern became obvious after the sixth marker. They formed a straight line. Toward the ridge. Toward the road. Toward the exact route a developer would want. I photographed everything. Every marker. Every track. Every disturbed section of ground. Then I noticed something else. A small ribbon tied to one of the stakes. White plastic. Printed lettering. Engineering notation. My flashlight caught only part of it before the ribbon twisted in the wind. But I recognized enough. It belonged to a surveying company. Not a local one. A regional firm that worked large-scale developments. The next morning brought another surprise. A certified letter waited in my mailbox. The paper smelled fresh from the printer. The language inside was polished and formal. According to the notice, Willow Creek Estates intended to pursue legal remedies against any actions that interfered with planned infrastructure improvements. Planned infrastructure improvements. On land they did not own. I read the sentence twice. Then 3 times. My coffee tasted bitter after that. Around noon, a contractor I knew from Austin called unexpectedly. We had worked together years earlier. He normally never discussed client business. This time was different. His voice sounded cautious. He asked if I still owned the acreage behind Willow Creek. When I said yes, the line went quiet for a moment. Then he told me something that stopped me cold. Several construction firms had already been invited to bid on a major future project in that exact area. Roads, utilities, drainage systems. The planning budget alone was enormous. I thanked him and ended the call. The wind rattled the trees outside my office window. Suddenly, the larger picture came into focus. They were not hoping to build someday. They were already preparing to build. Then my security camera sent an alert from the access road. The security camera alert appeared on my phone at 2:17 p.m. I opened the feed immediately. A white survey truck sat beside the access road. 2 men in reflective vests stood near the gate. One carried a tripod. The other held a tablet. Neither had permission to be there. The camera microphone picked up fragments of conversation as wind moved through the trees. I heard one phrase clearly. Corridor. Verification. That got my attention. I grabbed my keys and headed out. The afternoon sun baked the gravel road. Heat shimmered above the pasture. By the time I arrived, the truck was gone. Only fresh tire tracks remained. The gate stood closed. The survey crew had left nothing behind. Almost nothing. Near the fence line, I found a small plastic flag partially buried in the dirt. A serial number was printed along the edge. I photographed it before slipping it into my pocket. Then I called an old colleague named Mark Jensen. Mark specialized in land surveying. We had worked together for years before I left the engineering business. If anyone could identify the marker, it was him. He called back less than an hour later. His reaction came before any explanation. Where did you get that? I looked across the pasture through my office window. The late afternoon light turned the grass gold. On my property, I said. Silence followed. Not confusion. Concern. Mark finally spoke again. That marker is not for residential lot surveys. My grip tightened around the phone. What is it for? Papers rustled on his end. Computer keys clicked. Then he gave me an answer I did not expect. Large infrastructure planning. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air conditioner hummed overhead. Outside, a hawk drifted above the ridge. Mark continued. The marker belonged to a consulting group that usually worked on regional development corridors, transportation routes, utility systems, major projects, not neighborhood expansions, not subdivision entrances, something bigger, much bigger. After the call ended, I spread Walter's documents across my dining table again. Photographs, maps, meeting notices, development proposals. For the first time, I stopped looking at individual pieces. I started looking for timelines. Dates began lining up. Certain names appeared over and over. Brenda, Randall, several consulting firms, county planners. Then another name surfaced repeatedly. East Horizon Development Partners. I had never heard of them, yet they seemed connected to nearly every proposal. I searched public records until well after sunset. The glow from my laptop reflected off the windows. Outside, darkness settled across the pasture. Crickets chirped beyond the porch. The deeper I dug, the stranger things became. East Horizon rarely appeared publicly. They operated through subsidiaries, partnerships, consulting agreements, layers of paperwork. But one detail stood out. They specialized in acquiring land around future growth corridors before announcements became public. I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly, the pressure campaign made more sense. The purchase offers, the survey crews, the urgency. They were positioning themselves ahead of something. Around 10 o'clock that night, another email arrived. Not from Randall, not from Brenda. This one came from an anonymous address. No greeting, no signature, only a single attachment. My pulse quickened slightly. I downloaded the file and opened it. A map filled the screen. A very detailed map. Colored lines crossed dozens of properties. Proposed roads, utility routes, drainage systems, development phases. Then I saw my land. A thick red line ran directly through the access road. Someone had highlighted it in bright yellow. Beside it sat a short note. Everything depends on this section. Then I noticed the date printed in the corner. The date in the corner stopped me cold. It was nearly 3 years old. I stared at the screen for several seconds. The glow from the monitor reflected across the dining table. Outside, the wind brushed through the oak trees. The map was not showing a future concept. It was showing a plan that had already existed long before I ever bought the property. That changed everything. I zoomed in closer. The highlighted corridor followed the exact route of my access road. Not approximately. Exactly. Every curve matched. Every turn matched. Someone had built an entire development strategy around a piece of land they did not own. The note beside the corridor kept pulling my eyes back. Everything depends on this section. 4 words. That was all. Yet those 4 words explained months of pressure. The purchase offers. The surveys. The threats hidden behind polished letters. The sudden urgency. I printed the map before doing anything else. The printer hummed in the quiet house. Page after page slid into the tray. The smell of warm paper filled the room. Then I called Walter. He answered before the second ring. I told him about the map. Silence followed. Then I heard a chair scrape across a floor. Bring it over tomorrow morning, he said. Do not email it to anyone. The call ended. That response told me plenty. I barely slept that night. Around dawn, I loaded the documents into a folder and drove west. Fog hung low across the fields. Dew covered the grass. The world felt quiet in that strange way it does before sunrise fully arrives. Walter was already sitting on his porch when I pulled up. Coffee steamed from a mug beside him. He studied the map for less than a minute before leaning back in his chair. The look on his face was not surprise. It was confirmation. I figured it was something like this, he said. The morning air felt cooler suddenly. Walter pointed toward the highlighted corridor. This is not about your 40 acres. He tapped the paper again. It never was. I looked at him. He looked at the map. Then he explained what nobody else had been willing to say directly. The access road connected more than my property. It connected every major parcel behind Willow Creek. Hundreds of acres. Future neighborhoods. Utility corridors. Drainage systems. Construction access. Emergency routes. Everything flowed through that corridor. Without it, the entire project became dramatically more complicated. More expensive. More uncertain. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the trees. Walter folded his arms. That road is the key. There it was. The answer hiding in plain sight the entire time. Not the pasture. Not the ridge. Not the timber. The road. I stared across the map again. Suddenly dozens of earlier conversations made sense. Every strange question. Every offer. Every survey crew. Every appearance by Randall. Every visit from Brenda. They were all orbiting the same thing. Around noon, I drove to the county records office. The building smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. Ceiling fans rotated slowly overhead. I spent hours reviewing archived documents. Easements. Surveys. Historical plats. Property transfers. The deeper I dug, the more consistent the story became. My corridor appeared again and again. Different decades. Different projects. Same corridor. Then I found a filing that made my pulse jump. It referenced a failed acquisition attempt from years earlier. Someone had already tried to secure rights through the same route before. They failed. I photographed every page. By the time I stepped outside, the sun was dropping toward the horizon. My phone vibrated before I reached the truck. The message came from an unknown number. They know you are looking now. They know you are looking now. I read the message 3 times before locking my phone. The parking lot outside the county records office felt different suddenly. A warm breeze moved through the trees. Cars passed on the highway beyond the building. Everything looked normal. That was the unsettling part. Whoever sent the message knew where I had been. They knew what I was researching. More importantly, they wanted me to know they were watching. I drove home without replying. The tires hummed against the pavement. Late afternoon sunlight flashed through the windshield. By the time I reached the property, I had already made a decision. I was done reacting. From that point forward, I would let them think their pressure was working. The next morning, I accepted a meeting with Randall. The invitation arrived less than an hour after the anonymous text. That timing was interesting. We met at a restaurant near the edge of town. Ceiling fans turned slowly overhead. The smell of coffee and grilled onions filled the air. Randall arrived 5 minutes early. His smile appeared polished as ever. He slid a folder across the table before the waitress even brought water. The offer inside was higher than the last one. Much higher. I flipped through the pages carefully. Randall watched my face the entire time. He expected resistance. Instead, I asked questions. Lots of questions. He seemed relieved. The more cooperative I appeared, the more confident he became. That confidence was useful. People reveal things when they think they are winning. During the conversation, he mentioned future growth several times. He mentioned infrastructure improvements, regional planning, long-term community vision. He never once mentioned the access corridor directly. That omission stood out more than anything he actually said. When the meeting ended, I thanked him for the offer and promised to consider it. His handshake felt noticeably firmer than before. As I walked toward my truck, I caught him smiling through the restaurant window. Good. Let him smile. Over the next 2 weeks, I changed my approach completely. I stopped arguing. I stopped challenging survey crews. I stopped responding to every letter from the HOA. Brenda seemed delighted by the change. Her violation notices became less frequent. Her public comments became less hostile. Twice I even saw her laughing with Randall near the subdivision entrance. They believed the pressure campaign was finally working. Meanwhile, I spent my evenings building a timeline. Every document, every photograph, every meeting notice, every proposal. My dining table disappeared beneath stacks of records. The smell of printer ink lingered in the house. Coffee cups multiplied across every surface. Small connections began forming. Dates aligned. Names repeated. Patterns emerged. Then another ally appeared unexpectedly. Mark called one evening while I was reviewing county filings. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Thunder rolled in the distance. His voice sounded excited. He had traced the serial number from the survey marker. The consulting firm had been working under contract for East Horizon Development Partners for nearly 3 years. 3 years. The same timeline as the map. The same timeline as the hidden planning documents. The same timeline as the earliest photographs Walter showed me. The pieces were finally starting to fit together. A few days later, construction activity increased around Willow Creek. More trucks. More survey equipment. More engineers. One afternoon, I counted 6 separate contractor vehicles entering the area. They were moving faster now. Much faster. That told me something important. They believed the last obstacle was about to disappear. Then Walter called just before sunset. His voice was calm. Too calm. He had found the date for the next county planning session. The date of the county planning session sat on a yellow sticky note beside my computer monitor for the next 10 days. Every morning I saw it. Every night I saw it. The closer it came, the busier Willow Creek became. Survey trucks arrived before sunrise. Contractors visited properties that had been untouched for years. Utility consultants walked sections of land carrying clipboards and tablets. Nobody seemed worried about being discreet anymore. That alone told me something. They believed approval was already secured. The planning session was becoming a formality. One afternoon, I drove past the subdivision entrance and noticed new presentation boards stacked inside the community clubhouse. Large renderings, architectural sketches, landscaping concepts, future streets, decorative ponds. Everything looked polished, expensive, ready for public display. Through the clubhouse windows, I spotted Brenda speaking with a group of residents. She looked relaxed, confident. Her hands moved across the boards as she explained something. Several people nodded enthusiastically. The smell of fresh mulch drifted across the parking lot. Golf carts moved between homes. On the surface, it looked like a celebration. Underneath, it felt like a campaign. Later that evening, another envelope appeared in my mailbox. Randall's company logo sat in the corner. Inside was an updated purchase proposal. The amount was even higher. I almost laughed when I saw the number. Not because it was impressive, because it confirmed everything. Nobody pays that much for land unless losing it would cost far more. I filed the offer away without responding. 2 days later, Brenda knocked on my front door personally. The afternoon sun reflected off her sunglasses. A luxury sport utility vehicle sat in my driveway behind her. She carried a gift basket filled with local products. Honey, coffee, jam. The gesture felt almost comical after months of pressure. I thought we should start fresh, she said. Her smile looked carefully rehearsed. I thanked her politely, and accepted the basket. Then I invited her onto the porch. The conversation lasted 15 minutes. She spoke about community growth, economic opportunity, shared interests, regional benefits. She never once mentioned the access corridor. She never once mentioned the development map. She never once mentioned the survey crews. The omissions were louder than the conversation itself. When she finally left, she looked satisfied. Good. Let her be satisfied. That night, I met Walter and Mark at Walter's ranch. The smell of coffee mixed with the scent of damp earth from a recent rain. Documents covered the kitchen table. Survey records, historical plats, archived filings. We reviewed everything one final time. Mark traced property lines across several maps. Walter compared dates from old county records. Slowly, a complete picture emerged. Not assumptions, not theories. Facts, timelines, documentation, evidence. Every piece supported the same conclusion. The corridor had always been the critical link. Without it, future expansion became dramatically harder, more expensive, potentially impossible under the proposed layout. Around midnight, we finally pushed the papers aside. Rain tapped softly against the roof. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Walter smiled for the first time in weeks. They built their entire plan around an assumption. He did not need to explain further. We all knew which assumption. The assumption that I would eventually sell. The assumption that pressure would work. The assumption that ownership could be negotiated away. 3 days before the planning session, invitations for a community presentation appeared online. Renderings were published publicly. Developers began speaking openly about future phases. Local news outlets picked up the story. Brenda appeared in interviews. Randall appeared beside her. Both looked delighted. Watching them, you would think everything had already been approved. Then an email arrived from the county planning office confirming the final agenda. One item near the bottom immediately caught my eye. Public comment period. 10 minutes allocated before final consideration of the proposal. I stared at the screen. The soft glow from the monitor reflected across my desk. Outside, wind moved through the trees. 10 minutes was not much. It did not need to be. Not if the right information reached the right people. The morning of the planning session arrived clear and cool. The courthouse annex parking lot filled early. Pickup trucks lined the rows. Contractors gathered near the entrance. Residents from Willow Creek arrived carrying brochures and presentation packets. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the lobby. Everyone seemed excited, optimistic, confident. I carried a single leather folder. Nothing more. Brenda stood near the front doors greeting people as they arrived. Randall moved through the crowd shaking hands. Several local officials chatted beside display boards showing future phases of development. Large color renderings covered entire walls. New roads, new homes, landscaped entrances, decorative lakes. The atmosphere felt more like a celebration than a public hearing. That detail mattered. People lower their guard when they think the outcome is already decided. I took a seat near the back of the room. Walter sat 3 rows behind me. Mark sat near the side aisle. Neither drew attention to themselves. We had agreed on that beforehand. The meeting began exactly at 9 o'clock. Ceiling lights hummed softly overhead. Papers shuffled. Microphones crackled. One speaker after another praised the proposal. Economic growth, community benefits, increased property values, improved infrastructure. The language sounded familiar because I had been hearing versions of it for months. Then Brenda approached the podium. She spoke confidently, smoothly. She thanked residents, developers, county staff. She described years of planning and cooperation. The audience nodded along. Several people applauded when she finished. Randall followed next. He presented maps and projections. Charts appeared on large screens. Future phases stretched across the valley. Numbers filled the room. Investment totals, construction schedules, projected demand. Everything looked polished, professional, complete. Then he displayed a corridor map. My corridor map, not the version I possessed. A simplified version, one with critical details missing. My attention sharpened immediately. Randall moved. Past it quickly, too quickly. He did not want questions about that section. After nearly 2 hours of presentations, the chair announced the public comment period. The room settled. A few residents spoke first. Supportive comments. General questions. Then my name was called. The silence felt different as I walked toward the podium. Not dramatic. Curious. Brenda watched from the front row. Randall leaned back in his chair. Neither appeared concerned. I placed the folder on the podium and opened it. The microphone amplified the soft sound of paper sliding across wood. Then I began. I did not argue. I did not accuse. I simply presented dates, documents, historical filings, archived maps, acquisition attempts, survey records, one piece at a time. The room grew quieter with every page. Several county staff members began reviewing copies I had provided earlier that morning. A planner flipped through the documents twice. Another highlighted sections with a pen. Then I displayed the 3-year-old development map, the original version, the one showing the highlighted corridor. Heads lifted across the room. Conversation stopped. Randall sat forward. For the first time all day, his expression changed. Brenda looked toward him immediately. Not toward me. Toward him. That reaction told its own story. I continued speaking. Calmly. Methodically. Then I placed one final document on the projector screen. The room went completely silent. The room went completely silent. The document on the screen was not complicated. That was the problem. Everyone could understand it immediately. A historical access agreement. Recorded decades earlier. Still active. Still enforceable. Still tied directly to the corridor running through my property. Several county staff members leaned closer to read it. Papers began moving across tables. The planning chair adjusted his glasses and reviewed the projected page twice. Then a third time. The air conditioning hummed softly overhead. Nobody seemed interested in the presentation boards anymore. All attention had shifted to the same section of land everyone had been trying to avoid discussing openly. I stepped away from the podium and let the documents speak for themselves. That was always the strongest approach. Facts require less emotion. A planner sitting near the front began comparing my records with the materials submitted by the development team. Another official requested copies from the clerk. The process moved slowly at first. Then it accelerated. Questions started appearing. Important questions. Why had the corridor been omitted from certain presentations? Why did internal planning maps differ from public versions? Why were acquisition efforts dating back several years never disclosed during the approval process? The atmosphere changed. Brenda stopped smiling. Randall stopped taking notes. The confidence that had filled the room all morning began disappearing one piece at a time. A county attorney entered the discussion next. She reviewed several filings quietly before speaking with staff members seated nearby. Their conversation remained private, but their expressions did not. Something was clearly wrong. Residents from Willow Creek started whispering among themselves. Several had attended expecting approval and celebration. Instead, they were watching planners question the foundation of the entire proposal. One homeowner raised his hand and asked whether the project could proceed without guaranteed corridor access. Nobody answered immediately. That silence was revealing. The answer eventually came from a transportation consultant. His voice sounded careful. Very careful. Alternative access solutions would require significant redesign. Additional reviews. Additional costs. Additional delays. The room grew even quieter. I noticed Brenda looking toward Randall repeatedly. Randall avoided eye contact. That detail spoke volumes. The planning chair called for a brief recess. People stood and gathered into small groups. Conversations filled the room. Coffee cups moved between tables. Phones appeared everywhere. I remained near the back wall with Walter and Mark. Through the windows, afternoon sunlight reflected off parked vehicles outside. Walter looked calmer than he had in months. Mark simply shook his head. Neither needed to say much. The situation was unfolding exactly as the records suggested it would. 20 minutes later, the meeting resumed. County staff presented preliminary concerns regarding documentation discrepancies and access assumptions. The language remained professional, measured, but the meaning was unmistakable. The proposal could not move forward in its current form. Additional review would be required. More documentation would be required. Several approvals would be postponed pending clarification. Brenda's shoulders visibly stiffened. Randall's legal team requested time to respond. The request was granted. Yet the momentum had already shifted. Public confidence was gone. Questions were multiplying. Reporters who had arrived expecting a routine planning story suddenly had something far more interesting to cover. Cameras appeared. Interviews began. By the end of the afternoon, the approval everyone expected never happened. Instead, county officials announced a formal review process. The development team left quickly. Residents remained behind discussing what they had learned. Outside, the warm Texas air carried the smell of fresh-cut grass from nearby fields. For the first time in months, nobody was pressuring me to sell. Nobody was demanding cooperation. Nobody was acting like the outcome had already been decided. Then a reporter stopped me near the parking lot and asked a question that changed everything. The reporter stopped me near the parking lot and asked a simple question. Did you know this would happen? Warm air drifted across the pavement. Camera crews moved between small groups of residents. County officials were still leaving the building behind us. I looked past the reporter toward the courthouse annex entrance. Brenda was speaking with attorneys. Randall was on his phone. Neither looked pleased. I knew the documents mattered, I said. The rest was up to them. The reporter lowered her microphone slightly. That answer ended up appearing on local news that evening. Then the real fallout began. Over the next several weeks, county staff reviewed records, filings, maps, and planning materials connected to the proposal. More questions surfaced. Additional meetings followed. The development timeline slowed to a crawl. Every new review seemed to uncover another assumption that had never been properly addressed. The corridor remained at the center of every discussion, just as it always had. The difference was that people were finally talking about it openly. Summer settled over the valley. The smell of cut grass returned every weekend. Cicadas filled the afternoons. Life gradually became quieter. Survey trucks stopped appearing outside my gate. The certified letters stopped arriving. Even the security carts disappeared from the subdivision entrance. One morning I drove past Willow Creek and noticed the large promotional banners had been removed from the clubhouse windows. The renderings were gone too. Only empty glass remained. A few months later, Randall's company officially withdrew its proposal and announced it would reevaluate future options. The statement sounded professional, carefully written, but everyone understood what it meant. The project they had spent years preparing could not move forward the way they intended. Not anymore. Around the same time, HOA elections took place. Residents had questions. Lots of them. They wanted to know why key information had never been shared. They wanted to know why promises had been made before critical issues were resolved. By the end of the election cycle, new leadership took over. Brenda quietly stepped away from her position. I never saw another violation notice with her signature on it. Walter found that particularly amusing. One evening he sat on my porch drinking coffee while the sun dropped behind the ridge. The pasture glowed gold beneath the fading light. Funny thing about shortcuts, he said. They usually end up being the longest route. I laughed. He was not wrong. A year passed. Then another. The land remained exactly what I wanted it to be when I bought it. Oak trees. Open sky. Wind moving through tall grass. The creek still reflected morning sunlight the same way it always had. The access road remained untouched. Mine. Every now and then, someone would ask whether I regretted not selling. I always gave the same answer. No, because the story was never really about money. It was about ownership, responsibility, understanding the value of something before everyone else notices it. One cool autumn morning, I drove slowly down the gravel road with the windows open. The tires crunched beneath the truck. The air smelled like cedar and dry earth. In the distance, a hawk circled above the valley. I stopped near the ridge where I first stood after buying the property years earlier. The view had not changed. That felt good. Some things should not change. I looked down the corridor that had caused so much trouble. The same corridor people spent years trying to control. In the end, they never needed to understand who I was. They only needed to understand one thing. They thought they owned the future. They never owned the way to reach it.